The afternoon sun, thick and heavy with late summer, poured through the bay window of Judge Alistair Finch's living room. It fell in a perfect silent rectangle across the Persian rug, illuminating dancing motes of dust. The room was a museum to quiet order. Every book on the shelf stood at strict attention. The brass clock on the mantel ticked with a soft, metronomic certainty. And in the corner, draped with a faded velvet cover, sat the grand piano, a silent, hulking presence he had not touched in 7 years. Alistair sat in his wingback chair, a leather-bound volume of legal history open, but unread on his lap. His face was a landscape of careful composure, lined not with laughter, but with years of considered judgment. This was his sanctuary, his kingdom of stillness, carved out after the world had become too loud, too bright, after the music had stopped. Then it began. It was a sound that didn't belong, an alien invasion of his peace. A clumsy, stumbling scale on a piano, notes tripping over each other from somewhere next door. Asterisk C, D, E, F, G. Then a halt, a wrong note, a frustrated mutter he could almost hear through the wall. Then it started again. Asterisk C, D, E, F, G. Asterisk, his jaw tightened. The new neighbors had moved in 3 weeks ago. He'd seen the moving truck, the family with their 2 bright smiles, and their teenage daughter. He'd offered a curt nod, nothing more. He'd hoped for quiet professionals, not this. The scales stopped, replaced by the fumbling beginnings of a piece. It was a simple classical etude, but played with such halting uncertainty that it was rendered into a form of auditory torture. A pause, then the same 4 bars, again. And again, Alistair placed his book on the side table with deliberate softness. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the patience he was once famous for on the bench. But that was different. In his courtroom, he controlled the noise. Here, in his own home, he was under siege. This had gone on for days. Brief, predictable eruptions of sound in the late afternoons. He'd endured it, telling himself it was a phase, that they would get a teacher, that it would stop. But it hadn't. Each wrong note was like a pinprick against his carefully constructed calm. Today, the pinpricks felt like daggers. A particular phrase, a melody his wife had once played with effortless grace, was being butchered beyond recognition. It wasn't just noise. It felt like a desecration. He stood up, his tall frame unfolding stiffly. He walked to the window and looked out. Next door, in the mirror image house, the window to what was probably a front room was wide open. The curtains fluttered. He could see the shadow of someone moving inside. Enough. He didn't grab his jacket. He marched out his own front door, the summer air feeling hostile and warm, and crossed the 20 feet of pristine lawn that separated the 2 houses. His footsteps were firm on their paved walkway. He didn't hesitate. He rapped sharply on the front door, the sound echoing his own irritation. A moment passed. He heard a quick, light tread inside. The door opened, and there stood the girl. She was probably 17, with dark hair tied in a messy bun and eyes that were wide, immediately wary. She held a pencil in one hand, a sheet of music in the other. "Yes," she said, her voice polite but guarded. "I am your neighbor," Alistair began, his voice low and measured, the courtroom baritone rolling out automatically. "Judge Finch." "I know," the girl said softly. "I've seen you. Then you will understand the importance of peace and quiet," he continued, not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. "The sound of your rehearsals is carrying into my home. It is disruptive." A flush crept up the girl's neck. "Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm practicing for an audition. It's in 2 weeks. I'm trying to get the fingering right on this section, and it's just not." He held up a hand, stopping her. He didn't need the details. A plea was being entered, but he had already made his ruling. The what is not relevant. The effect is. The repeated errors are particularly jarring. She looked down at her sheet music, her shoulders slumping slightly. The pencil trembled in her fingers. I'll try to play more quietly. Or maybe I can close the window. Quietly is not the issue, Alistair said. He looked past her into the house and saw the upright piano against the far wall. It was a modest instrument, nothing like the silent giant in his own corner. The issue is the fundamental quality of the sound. What you are producing. He searched for the right, definitive word. It is not music. Not yet. At present, it is simply an audible trespass. The words hung in the air between them, harsh and cold. He saw her flinch as if physically struck. Her eyes, which had been wary, now glistened with a film of hurt and embarrassment. She looked young, suddenly, and desperately earnest. An audible trespass? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Precisely, he said, nodding once. Until it ceases to be a disturbance, it should cease entirely, or be confined to a space where it does not violate another's right to quiet enjoyment. He was quoting a legal principle now, his armor fully on. I trust you understand. He didn't wait for an answer. He had delivered his verdict. He gave her a slight, formal nod, the same one he'd given from the bench 1,000 times, and turned on his heel. He walked back across the lawn, leaving her standing in the doorway, the sheet of music hanging limply at her side. Not back inside his own house, he closed the door. The silence rushed back in, deeper than before. He returned to his chair. The rectangle of sun had moved an inch. The dust motes still danced. The clock ticked out. He picked up his book, but the words blurred. He replayed the encounter in his mind. He had been firm, clear. He had established a boundary. That was necessary. The law and a peaceful life required clear boundaries, Dot. So why did the silence now feel so heavy? He could still see the look on her face, the shock, then the crushing disappointment. He pushed the image away. It was not his concern. His concern was the sanctity of his home, a sanctuary he built brick by brick after the bottom fell out of his world. This house, this quiet, was all he had left. From next door, no sound came. Not a single note. The audible trespass had ceased. He had won. He sat in his perfect, silent room, and for the first time in a long time, Judge Alistair Finch felt, unmistakably, like a villain in his own story. The victory was ash in his mouth. The silence he had fought for now pressed in on him, not as peace, but as a profound and aching loneliness. And in that thick, sun-drenched quiet, the ghost of a melody, played perfectly and with great love, began to echo in the hollows of his memory, making the present stillness almost unbearable. The silence that followed his victory was a hollow thing. Judge Alistair Finch sat in his chair for a long time, the legal history book a weight on his knees. The words he'd spoken to the girl, audible trespass, repeated in his mind with a cold metallic taste. He had been right, of course. He had a right to peace. But the look on her face, that quick flash of crushed hope, kept intruding. He told himself it was a necessary harshness. The world was not soft. Dreams required discipline, and discipline often tasted bitter. He was doing her a favor, in a way, teaching her about consequences. But the house disagreed Dot with the invasive noise gone. Every other sound seemed to amplify. The relentless tick-tock of the mantel clock was no longer a comforting rhythm, but a slow hammer driving seconds into the quiet. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen felt aggressive. His own breathing sounded too loud. Dot he stood, unable to sit still, and paced the length of the living room. His steps were muffled by the rug, but in the stillness, he felt like a ghost haunting his own home. He stopped at the bay window. Next door, the girl's window was now firmly shut, the curtains drawn. A complete surrender. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt a strange, unsettled emptiness. His gaze, drifting back into his own room, landed on it. The grand piano in the corner. The velvet cover was a deep burgundy, faded to a rusty brown in patches, where the sun had caught it over the years. A fine layer of dust made the fabric look matte and lifeless. He hadn't touched that cover in 7 years. Not since the day after the funeral, when he had smoothed it over the closed keyboard lid, sealing it away like a tomb. He found himself walking towards it. His hand, without his brain's permission, reached out and touched the dusty velvet. A small cloud of particles drifted into the sunbeam. He gripped a corner of the cloth dot, and then he let go, as if it had burned him. He turned away, a familiar tight pain forming behind his ribs. He went to the kitchen, made a pot of tea with excessive focus, the clink of the spoon against the ceramic mug too sharp. He carried the mug back to his chair, but didn't drink. He just stared at the piano. The silence wasn't just the absence of the girl's clumsy scales. It was the absence of everything else. It was the absence of laughter that used to bounce off these walls. The absence of a voice calling from the kitchen, asking if he wanted more coffee. The absence of music. Real music. His wife, Eleanor, hadn't just played the piano. She had lived at it. She was a music teacher, and their home had always been filled with sound. Scales from her beginner students, halting and sweet. The passionate drama of advanced student sonata, and her own playing light, flowing as natural as breathing. She'd play while he read the paper, little snippets of jazz or old show tunes. She'd play gentle classical pieces in the evening as the light died. That piano wasn't furniture. It had been the heart of the house, and she had been its pulse. The memory was so vivid, it was physical. He could see her, head tilted slightly, a small, focused smile on her lips as her hands moved. He could hear the particular piece she'd play when she knew he was stressed from a difficult case as simple. Lilting melody she'd composed herself. Just a few lines. Something she called her courtroom comment. She'd never written it down properly. It just was like air. He realized, with a jolt, that the girl next door had been fumbling through the very same beginner's etude Eleanor used to assign to her youngest students. The same one. That's what had pierced his armor so deeply. It wasn't just noise. It was a ghost of a memory, a distorted echo of a happier, louder, livelier time. A time he had systematically sealed away behind a wall of routine and silence. The grief, then, was not a slow, sad wave. It was a sudden, violent surge. It rose up from a place he kept locked and barricaded, smashed through the dam of his composure, and filled his throat. His eyes stung. He set the mug down with a clumsy clatter, tea sloshing over the side. He hadn't cried in years. He believed he'd finished with all that. He had organized grief like he organized his files. Acknowledged, processed, filed away. But this was raw and fresh. It was the grief for the music most of all. For the silence he had chosen, which now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a life sentence. He stood again, drawn back to the piano. This time, he didn't stop himself. He took the velvet cover in both hands and pulled it off in one slow motion. The dust swirled around him in a golden cloud. Underneath, the piano's polished walnut wood was dull, but still beautiful. The lid was closed. He reached out, lifted it, and the familiar sight of the black and white keys, like a long, frozen smile, made his breath catch. He expected to feel a tsunami of pain. Instead, he felt a profound, aching emptiness. The instrument was a shell. The music had left with her. He hovered a finger over middle C, but couldn't bring himself to press it. To break the silence with a note from this piano felt like a transgression too great. What if the note came out, and it was just a note? A dead, hollow sound? Or worse, what if it was still alive, and the sound unleashed everything he'd spent 7 years burying? He closed the lid gently. He did not replace the cover. He left it sitting there, exposed, a silent monument in the corner of the room. A challenge. A question dot next door. The absolute silence continued. He found himself listening for it, hoping for a faint, defiant scale to break through. Anything, but there was nothing. He had extinguished the sound. He had protected his quiet, and in doing so, he had reminded himself exactly why the quiet was so terrible. He had chased away a faint, imperfect echo of his past, and was now left alone with the much louder, more perfect silence of his present. That evening he ate a solitary meal. The house felt larger, colder. The exposed piano seemed to watch him. He went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in the dark, and in the stillness, he heard not the girl's mistakes, but the perfect, clear notes of Eleanor's playing, a melody from a lost time, playing on a loop in the museum of his mind. He realized, with a clarity that was almost cruel, that the real audible trespass wasn't coming from next door. It was the relentless, beautiful, haunting music of his own memory, and there was no wall thick enough to keep that out. The day after he took the cover off the piano felt different. The sun through the bay window hit the exposed wood, casting a warm, oblong reflection on the floor. It was no longer a shrouded piece of furniture. It was a presence. Judge Alistair Finch found his eyes drifting to it every few minutes, as if expecting it to speak. The silence from next door was now a fact of life. He'd won. He should have been settling back into his peaceful routine. But the routine felt broken. The quiet he had fought for had become an accusation. Every time he heard the faint, muffled sounds of life from the other house, a door closing, a voice calling, he felt a pang of something like guilt. He imagined the girl practicing silently on a keyboard with headphones, or perhaps not practicing at all. He had possibly crushed the very thing she was working towards. He, a man who had spent his career weighing evidence and consequences, had acted on a selfish impulse, and the consequence was this heavy, uncomfortable stillness. He tried to read. He tried to listen to the radio, a news station with calm, droning voices. But his mind kept returning to the look on her face, the pencil in her hand, the sheet of music. The words audible trespass now sounded pompous and cruel in his memory. Not firm and judicial. By mid-afternoon, he was restless. He decided to work in the garden, a small, tidy patch of roses he maintained with the same precision he applied to everything else. As he was trimming dead blooms, he heard the front door of the next house open and close. He didn't look up, but from the corner of his eye, he saw the girl's grandmother walking down the path to the mailbox. She was a small woman with a kind, wrinkled face, always offering a wave when she saw him. Today, she didn't just wave. She stopped, clutching a few envelopes, and looked at him. He felt obliged to stand up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice stiff. "Afternoon, Judge," she replied. Her voice was soft, but there was a firmness in her eyes. "Lovely roses. Thank you." A moment of silence hung between them, filled with the unspoken. The older woman glanced back at her house, then at him. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "My granddaughter," she began. "She's been practicing in the basement since yesterday. It's cooler down there, and the sound doesn't travel so much. She says she doesn't want to disturb the peace." Alistair felt a hot flush creep up his neck. He gave a single slow nod. "I appreciate that." The grandmother smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a sad, understanding smile. "She's a hard worker. This audition, it means the world to her." A chance at a summer program with a real maestro. She's had her heart set on it for a year. She paused, watching him. The piano is her voice, you see. She's a quiet thing, doesn't say much. But when she plays, she says everything. The words landed heavily on Alistair. Her voice. He thought of the silent piano in his living room, which had once been his wife's voice. He had effectively asked the girl to mute herself, to go into the basement, to hide her voice. I didn't mean to. He started, but the sentence died. What had he meant to do? He'd meant to silence her, and he'd succeeded. The grandmother nodded, as if hearing his unfinished thought. I know you like your quiet. We'll be mindful. She turned to go, then stopped. She's not playing today, though. She's stuck on a piece. Can't find the heart of it, she says. Just playing the notes. She sighed, a gentle, weary sound. Sometimes the music needs air to find its heart. Can't breathe so well in a basement. She gave him a last, quiet look and went back inside. Alistair stood in his garden, the pruning shears hanging limply from his hand. The sun felt too bright. The old woman hadn't scolded him. She hadn't been angry. She had just stated facts, with a kindness that made him feel smaller than any shouting could have. He had forced a young artist into a basement. He had become a villain in a story about a girl and her music. He went back inside. The grand piano seemed to dominate the room even more. Her voice, the music needs air, the phrases echoed. He looked at the closed lid. For the first time, he didn't just see a relic of his own loss. He saw an instrument, a thing meant to make sound, to give someone a voice. An idea began to form in his mind. It was a preposterous idea, utterly against his nature. It involved reaching out, an act of vulnerability he had avoided for years. It involved admitting, in some small way, that he had been wrong. He fought against it all evening. He made dinner, ate it, cleaned up. The idea wouldn't leave. It nagged at him. It was the only way he could think of to lift the weight that had settled in his house. A weight made of his own guilt and the ghost of the music he'd chased away. The next morning, he made a decision. He sat at his desk, a formal, old-fashioned writing desk, and took out a piece of his personal stationery, thick, cream-colored paper with his name embossed at the top. He selected a fountain pen, the one he used for signing important documents. His hand was steady, but his mind was racing. How did one even begin? He was used to writing legal opinions, not. This. He started simply. Asterisk to my neighbor. Asterisk, asterisk. I wish to apologize for my discourteous manner the other day. My remarks were unduly harsh, and for that, I am sorry. Asterisk. He paused, staring at the words. They were true, but they felt insufficient. They were a judge's apology, correct, but cold. He thought of what the grandmother had said. The audition. The heart of the music. He dipped the pen again and continued. Asterisk, I understand you are preparing for an important audition. I also have a piano in my home, which is not currently in use. It is a fine instrument, and its acoustics in this room are, I am told, excellent. Asterisk, another pause. This was the dangerous part. The leap. Asterisk, if it would be of assistance to you, you would be welcome to use it for your practice sessions at a time that is mutually agreeable. This would allow you to practice without concern for disturbance. And perhaps the instrument might be of better service to your music than the one in your basement. Asterisk, asterisk, sincerely. Asterisk, asterisk, Alistair Finch, asterisk. He read it over. It was stiff, incredibly formal, but it was clear. It was an offer, a peace offering, a desperate attempt to let the music have some air again, even if it wasn't played by the hands he longed to hear. He folded the letter neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote, "For my neighbor," on the front. He didn't have the courage to ring the bell and face her again. He walked to their front door, slid the envelope halfway under the mat so it wouldn't blow away, and retreated quickly back to his own house, his heart beating a strange, unsteady rhythm. He sat in his chair, waiting. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Laughter? A slammed door? Silence? About 20 minutes later, there was a soft, tentative knock at his door. His breath caught. He stood, smoothed his sweater, and went to answer it. She stood there, the girl. She held his cream-colored envelope in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of caution, confusion, and a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe, Judge Finch? She said, her voice quiet. Yes. She looked down at the letter and back up at him. Is this a real offer? He nodded, his throat tight. It is. The piano is just sitting. It should be played. She swallowed, her eyes searching his face, looking for the trap, the trick. Why? The question was blunt, honest. He had to answer honestly. He couldn't give her a legal reason. He had to give her a human one, even if it was only a piece of it. Because, he said, the words coming slowly, I was wrong about what constitutes a disturbance. And because music should not be practiced in amazement. For a long moment, she just looked at him. The suspicion in her eyes softened, just a fraction. She glanced past him, into the living room, her eyes landing on the grand piano. He saw her musician's eye take it in the size, the shape, the potential in its silent strings. She took a deep breath. Could I see it? The girl stood in his doorway, a silhouette against the bright afternoon. Judge Alistair Finch stepped back, a wordless invitation. His heart was doing that strange, unsteady beating again, a feeling so foreign he couldn't name it. It was part panic, part something else, a nervous anticipation, like waiting for a verdict he himself had no control over. She stepped inside, her steps quiet on the hardwood floor. Her eyes didn't dart around the room, taking in his things. They went straight to the piano, as if pulled by a magnet. She walked toward it slowly, almost reverently, the letter from him still clutched in one hand. Alistair stayed by the door, giving her space. He watched as she approached the instrument. She didn't touch it at first. She just looked at it, the curve of its side, the polished but dusty lid, the ivory keys peeking out. It's beautiful, she said, her voice hushed. It was my wife's, he heard himself say. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. He never spoke of her to anyone. Not anymore. The girl glanced at him, a quick, understanding look, then back at the piano. It looks like it has stories. That simple observation struck him deeply. It did have stories. Thousands of them locked in its wood and strings. May I? She asked, her hand hovering near the lid. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. She lifted the lid, exposing the full glorious keyboard. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished surfaces. She pulled out the bench and sat down, her posture straightening automatically. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys, not pressing down, just feeling the cool smoothness. She closed her eyes for a second and took a deep, centering breath. Alistair recognized the ritual. He'd seen it 1,000 times. Then she began to play Dot. It was the same etude, the one she'd been struggling with, the one that had driven him to her door. But it was different now. The notes were the same, but they weren't clumsy or hesitant. They were careful, precise, and full of a new intention. The sound that filled the room was rich and warm, the tone of the grand piano so much fuller and more resonant than the sound that had leaked through the walls. The piano, after 7 years of silence, seemed to sigh and come alive under her touch. Alistair didn't move. He listened. She played through the piece once, cleanly, with no mistakes. It was technically correct. But he could hear what her grandmother meant. It was just the notes. It was proficient, but it was careful, like someone walking on ice. She finished and let her hands fall into her lap. She stared at the keys for a moment. "It's better," she said, more to herself than to him. "The instrument is. It's incredible. But it still feels empty." She sounded frustrated, almost sad. "The heart," Alistair said quietly, repeating her grandmother's word. She looked up, surprised he was still listening. "Yes, my teacher says I'm playing the map, not taking the journey. I don't know how to find it." She sighed. A young sound weighted with artistic burden. "The audition piece. It's not a famous one. My teacher gave it to me. She said it needs feeling, a personal story, or it just falls flat. It's called Eleanor's Lullaby. I don't know who Eleanor is." I tried to imagine, but the name hit Alistair like a physical blow. Eleanor's Lullaby. The air left his lungs. The room seemed to tilt. He must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, because the girl turned to look at him, her brow furrowed in concern. "Judge Finch? Are you all right?" He couldn't speak. He was frozen in place, his eyes wide, fixed on the piano. Eleanor's Lullaby. It wasn't a common title. It wasn't published. It existed in only one place, in his wife's hands and in the scribbled notations in her old music books. "We're," he stammered, his voice a dry rasp. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. "Where did you get that music?" "My teacher," the girl said, watching him closely, now clearly worried. "She found it in a box of old sheet music donated to the community center. It was handwritten. No composer listed. Just the title. She thought it was beautiful, and that it would suit me." She paused. "Why? Do you know it?" "Know it?" It was the melody that played in his dreams. The simple, lilting tune his wife had composed in their first year of marriage. The one she'd play when he was restless, or when she was thoughtful. Their private language. She joked about writing it down properly one day, but she never did. She must have, though. She must have written a copy, and it had somehow gotten mixed in with her teaching things, donated by a well-meaning friend or relative after she was gone, lost to the world until now. "Play it," he whispered. The command was soft, but urgent. The girl blinked. "Now?" "Please." She hesitated, then turned back to the piano. She arranged the sheet music she had brought with her on the stand, a photocopy of a handwritten score. He could see the familiar, loopy handwriting from across the room. His Eleanor's handwriting. A wave of dizziness passed over him. She began. The opening notes were a gentle, questioning ripple. They were exactly as he remembered. They floated into the quiet room, no longer just notes on a page. They were a key, turning in a lock he had sealed shut as she played. Something shifted in her. The technical caution fell away. Perhaps it was the gravity in his silence. Perhaps it was the connection she now sensed, humming in the air between them. She played with more feeling, the phrases beginning to breathe. She wasn't just playing the lullaby. She was asking its question, and Alistair was answering. With every bar, a memory unfolded. He saw Eleanor, young, at this very piano, her head bent over the keys as she worked the melody out, laughing when she hit a wrong note. He saw her playing it softly in the evening lamplight, a smile touching her lips as she glanced at him reading in his chair. He heard her humming it while she planted flowers in the garden. The music was a thread, pulling him back through time. The pain was there, sharp and fresh, but it was woven through with the sweetness he had forbidden himself to feel. It wasn't just grief. It was her. It was the essence of her gentleness, her love, her quiet joy. Tears, unbidden and unstoppable, filled his eyes. They blurred the image of the girl at the piano. So for a moment, It was just a silhouette, and he could almost believe. He didn't wipe them away. They traced warm paths down his cheeks, a release 7 years in the making. The girl played on, completely immersed now. She had found the heart. It was beating in the room, in the music, in the shared, unspoken history. She played the final resolving chord, a gentle, settling sound that seemed to linger in the dust-moted air. Then there was silence. A deep, profound, and utterly different silence. She turned slowly on the bench. Her own eyes were bright with unshed tears, moved by the music and by the raw emotion on the old man's face. She understood now. She knew who Eleanor was. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Alistair finally moved. He took a shaky step forward, then another. He stopped a few feet from the piano, his hand reaching out to rest on its sturdy edge, to steady himself. "No," he said, his voice thick but clear. "Don't be sorry. That was the first time I have heard that song since she left." He looked at the girl, really looked at her, seeing not an invader, but a bridge. "You found it? The heart. You gave it back to me." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft, fading echo of the piano string and the quiet, unsteady rhythm of Judge Alistair Finch's breathing. The space between him and the girl at the piano felt charged, not with tension, but with a shared, profound understanding. She had stepped into a sacred part of his past, and instead of breaking it, she had brought it to life. He finally wiped the wetness from his cheeks with the back of his hand, a rough, embarrassed gesture. "I apologize," he murmured, his voice still gravelly with emotion. "No," the girl said quickly, shaking her head. "Please don't. I understand now. It wasn't just a piece of music." "No," he agreed softly. "It never was." He gestured vaguely toward the sofa. "Would you like to sit?" It was an awkward offer, the rusty mechanics of hospitality creaking back into motion after years of disuse. She nodded, leaving the piano bench with a last, gentle touch on the keys. She sat perched on the edge of the sofa, looking small and solemn. He sat in his wingback chair, the space between them feeling less like a courtroom divide and more like the space between two people who have just witnessed something important. Her name was Eleanor. He began. The name no longer a painful secret to be kept, but a story to be shared. She was a music teacher. This piano? It was her world. Our home was full of her students, full of sound. She had a way of making even the simplest scale sound like a promise. He looked toward the instrument, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That lullaby. She wrote it when we were first married. Sighed I needed more soothing music in my life, less legalese." The girl listened, her earlier frustration and fear completely gone, replaced by a rapt attention. "How did you—" She ventured gently. "How did you stop, after?" He understood her meaning. How did he stop the music? He let out a long, slow breath. At first, the silence was a relief. Every note was a reminder. The quiet was a blanket I could pull over the pain. I thought if I could just make the world still enough, the ache would go quiet too. He met her eyes. I was wrong. I was just preserving the emptiness. She nodded slowly. And my practicing? It wasn't really about the noise, was it? He gave a rueful, honest shake of his head. It was a ghost. A badly played ghost of a time I had locked away. It frightened me. So I tried to banish it. He paused. I was unfair to you. And I am truly sorry. It's okay, she said, and she meant it. If you hadn't, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have played it here for you. A comfortable quiet settled between them, easier this time. Then a practical thought seemed to strike her. Her eyes widened slightly. The audition. It's in 4 days. They expect me to talk about the piece, about what it means to me." She looked at him, a new, hesitant hope in her expression. "Would you? Could you tell me about her? About Eleanor? So I can understand it better? So I can really play it for her?" The request was immense. It was an invitation to open the album of his life and turn the pages for a stranger. But she wasn't a stranger anymore. She was the keeper of the lullaby. He looked at her earnest face, and the wall around his heart, already cracked, gave way completely. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next few afternoons took on a new rhythm. The girl would arrive at 3 o'clock, always with a quiet knock. Alistair would let her in, and she would go straight to the piano. She would warm up, the scales and arpeggios that had once driven him to distraction now sounding purposeful, even beautiful, in the context of the grand old instrument. Then she would play Eleanor's lullaby, and as she played, Alistair would talk. He didn't tell a grand, dramatic story. He told small, specific truths. He told her about Eleanor's habit of humming while she cooked, about the way she would get dirt on her nose while gardening. He described her patience with her slow student and her fierce joy when that student finally mastered a piece. He talked about the way the setting sun would catch her hair as she played in this very room. The girl listened, and her playing changed. It absorbed the stories. The melody became warmer, more affectionate in the gentle passages. It gained a subtle, playful strength in the middle section, a reflection of Eleanor's spirit. The girl wasn't just performing notes. She was weaving a portrait in sound. Alistair, in turn, was healing. Speaking the memories aloud, sharing them with someone who truly wanted to listen, was like letting light into a dusty, closed-up room. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a walled-off prison. It was part of a history that also contained great love. He began to smile more, the lines on his face softening. The day before the audition, she played the piece straight through. When the last note faded, the room felt whole. She turned to him. "What do you think?" She asked, not as a student seeking approval, but as an artist seeking a final, crucial opinion. He thought for a moment. "She would have loved your touch," he said finally. "She would have said you found the quiet joy in it. That's what it was, you know. A lullaby of joy." The girl beamed, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her face. On the morning of the audition, she arrived not with her music bag, but dressed neatly, a nervous energy buzzing around her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, standing in his doorway. "For the piano, for the stories, for everything." "You will be magnificent," Alistair said, and he believed it. It was the same tone he'd once used to deliver a final, definitive ruling. He spent the day in an unusual state of suspense. He tidied the already tidy house. He made tea he didn't drink. He found himself standing by the piano, his hand resting on the wood where Eleanor's hands, and more recently, the girl's hands had brought music back into the world. It was late afternoon when he heard the front door of the neighboring house open and close, then quick, light footsteps on his walk. Her knock was rapid, excited. He opened the door. She was there, her face flushed, her eyes shining. Before she could speak, he saw the answer. "You got in," he stated. She nodded, breathless. "I did. And the adjudicator, the maestro, he asked me about the piece. I told him." She took a steadying breath. "I told him it was called Eleanor's Lullaby, and that it was written by a wonderful music teacher who believed music was a language of the heart. I told him I played it on her piano for her husband." Her eyes glistened. He said it was the most compelling performance of the day. He said he could hear the story. Alistair felt a surge of pride, so sharp and sweet it stole his breath. It was for the girl, for her triumph. But it was also for Eleanor. Her music, her spirit, had touched a room full of strangers. She was still teaching. That, he said, his voice firm with emotion, is the highest compliment you could have received. From that day, the silence in Judge Alistair Finch's house was forever changed. It was no longer an absolute, brittle thing. It was a peaceful space between sounds. The girl continued to come and practice, not every day, but often. The music that filled the rooms was no longer an invasion, but a gift, a shared language. Sometimes he would even sit at the piano himself. His fingers, stiff and unskilled, would find the simple melody of the lullaby. He played it badly, slowly, a single hesitant note at a time. But he played it, and next door or upstairs in her own house, the girl would hear the faltering, beautiful notes drifting through the open windows. She would smile and keep practicing, the two pianos in two houses weaving a fragile, new harmony in the neighborhood, testament to the fact that sometimes the deepest quiet is broken not by noise, but by a song you thought you'd forgotten, played by a hand you never expected to hear.